Twitter tirade. President Trump rails against one of his former foes. We have a report from the White House. Following the trail, a look at Democrats who have announced their 2020 presidential campaigns and where they stand on issues important to the faithful. Abuse crisis. A French cardinal convicted of concealing clergy misconduct meets with the Holy Father about his future. We're in Rome with a report. And pure madness. Catholic schools make a showing in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 18th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump goes on a 50-tweet attack, including saying the media is blaming him for Friday's mass shooting in New Zealand. White House staff are defending the president, saying he's not a white supremacist and condemning the attack against Muslims. We will have the latest on the attacks in just a few minutes, but first, White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. That's all been just part of the last 48 hours for the president. He's also starting his week fresh off a St. Patrick's Day that included going to church and criticizing the late Republican Senator John McCain. The president accused McCain of releasing a document at the center of the Russia investigation. The president writing, "So it was indeed just proven in court papers last in his class, John McCain that sent the fake dossier to the FBI and media, hoping to have it printed before the election." Ken Starr, the independent counsel who investigated President Clinton, had previously said if the claim were true of Senator McCain, it would be a very dark stain. President Trump went further, tweeting about McCain's support of Obamacare. He had far worse stains than this, including thumbs down on repeal and replace after years of campaigning to repeal and replace. The senator's daughter, Meghan McCain, tweeting back, "No one will ever love you the way they loved my father." White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway also praised McCain's service today while defending President Trump. She warned against cherry-picking his tweets.
I know the man I work for, and I know how he is to a boss for me, and I know what he's trying to do for this country, and I see him publicly, but then privately with people, and how he's trying to help a lot of Americans and has this great economy.
Sunday, the president heard a sermon in part condemning hate speech. He and the First Lady made a rare appearance at St. John's Episcopal Church across from the White House. The Reverend preached against attacks on people of faith, including the Muslim community in New Zealand.
Whenever we overhear or oversee hateful slurs against other people, perhaps we need the holy courage to call them out.
The First Lady's office tells us both the President and First Lady Melania Trump thought the service at St. John's was beautiful, and they went because they simply wanted to attend church. Lauren?
Mark, this week the president's budget is being released in its entirety. What are his priorities?
Well, we know presidents rarely pass their budgets, but a senior administration official tells us an unwavering commitment to keeping taxpayer funds from paying for abortions will be reflected in the fully released budget details. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. With 13 confirmed candidates and 3 exploratory committees, not including former VP Joe Biden, Democratic hopefuls for 2020 are off and running. And with the House and Senate on recess, the candidates are heading to battleground states. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us about the issues Democrats are championing. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke touts record-breaking first-day campaign donations, $6.1 million. Now, that's just a little more than Senator Bernie Sanders took in on his first day. The differences are glaring between Democratic contenders and President Trump, especially on hot-button issues like the wall and abortion.
Trans people who are patriots have a right to serve in the military.
Democratic candidates promised to scrap President Donald Trump's order stopping future enlistments of transgender troops.
We will undo the toxic, painful thing, not just to trans Americans, but to all Americans. It's an assault what he did by not allowing brave soldiers to serve.
Part of a broader pledge to champion a gay rights agenda.
You have seen victory for the LGBTQ community over and over and over again. And that is because you have never given up. You have never stopped marching. So march on, HRC, to 2020 victory.
The candidates also talk about abortion.
The decision regarding abortion must be made by the woman and not the government.
In Mississippi today,
I'm Elizabeth Warren.
the Massachusetts Democrats promoting a tax on the mega rich.
Everything above $50 million, a 2% tax. And the billionaires say, oh my gosh, we don't do a wealth tax.
While former Congressman Beto O'Rourke tours a union training center in Michigan.
We don't need a wall. $30 billion, 30 feet high, 2,000 miles long.
Officially joining the 2020 race yesterday, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Pass a Green New Deal. Get money out of politics.
Former Vice President Joe Biden still hasn't announced. And this possible Freudian slip was met with cheers of approval.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
Biden is nearing his decision. The president today, President Trump, trashed the former VP, calling Biden another low IQ person. Now, tomorrow, we'll be on the ground with Virginia Republican Ben Cline as he meets with his voters. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Terror attack in the Netherlands. At least 3 people are dead and 5 others injured after a gunman opened fire on a train. The shooting took place at a busy intersection in a residential neighborhood. Police have arrested one suspect, 37-year-old man who was born in Turkey. They add he may have had help. The Prime Minister of New Zealand promises changes to her country's gun laws following one of the nation's worst mass shootings. Jacinda Ardern says she's meeting with her cabinet members to talk about the next steps they are going to take to protect their citizens after Friday's attack on 2 mosques. She says gun reform will happen within 10 days. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Members of the Trump administration, including the Secretary of State and the Homeland Security Secretary, both offering their support to New Zealand. Authorities in the country are investigating whether the lone gunman who opened fire during Friday prayers had any outside help. Many New Zealanders are still in shock of the mass shootings as they mourn and pray. A steady stream of visitors arrived to pay their respects to the 50 people killed by a gunman at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. This makeshift memorial is outside the Al Noor Mosque, the site of one of the attacks.
We hear about things happening overseas a long way away, and I never ever thought I'd see anything like this in New Zealand ever, and I hope I never see it again.
This weekend, funerals and vigils honoring the victims across the country and in neighboring Australia. At the Vatican, Pope Francis asked the faithful to pray for our Muslim brothers. Survivors, meanwhile, try to cope with the terrifying experience.
I just can't stop thinking about it, getting those flashbacks, and it's one of those experiences which I wish no one ever encounters.
The 28-year-old suspect, who has been called a white supremacist, is charged with murder. Additional charges are expected. Investigators have been searching his family's home in Australia for clues.
We're so sorry for all the families over there, for the dead and the injured. Yeah, we just can't think nothing else. Just want to go home and hide.
New Zealand's Prime Minister calling out social media giants like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. The attack on Friday was broadcast live and was shared by users afterwards.
I would call on our social media platforms of all variety to demonstrate the kind of responsibility that both lead to these events and that includes those who perpetuate the messages in the aftermath.
Friday's video has reignited questions about how social media platforms handle offensive content, with many questioning if companies are doing enough to stop it. The suspect also released a 74-page manifesto on social media just minutes before the attack. It was filled with anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim comments. Facebook said it removed 1.5 million videos of the shooting during the first 24 hours after the massacre. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Coming up in just a few minutes on our broadcast, we'll talk to the rabbi from the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about the importance of interfaith dialogue. The synagogue there was the target of a mass shooting in October. Funerals and memorial services continue for the more than 150 people killed last week in the Ethiopian Airlines crash, including a Catholic priest from Kenya. Family members remember Father George, who was returning home to visit family on his annual leave. The 40-year-old had been a missionary in Rome and in Ethiopia. Thousands gathered for a group funeral there for 17 of the victims. For those who died, came from 35 countries, including the United States. Catholic leaders in El Salvador are condemning a proposal to grant amnesty to those who committed serious crimes during the country's civil war. The country's bishops say the proposal is unjust and would protect criminals while providing no help to victims. More than 75,000 people were killed in the 80s and 90s. The Vatican is pushing back against whistleblower reports saying there is serious and moral and financial corruption at its UN mission in New York. The Holy See says the visa status of its household staff is in compliance. They are paid more than the state's minimum wage. And the Catholic News Agency reported allegations this weekend of inappropriate sexual behavior by the former head of the UN mission, who now serves as the Vatican's ambassador in Central Asia. For more on this story, including a closer look at those allegations against the Archbishop who led the mission, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. French Cardinal Philippe Barbarin submits his resignation to Pope Francis. It comes after being convicted of cover-up in a sex abuse scandal. Earlier this month, Cardinal Barbarin was given a 6-month suspended prison sentence by court in France for failing to report a known pedophile priest. Barbarin's conviction deepens the crisis facing the Catholic Church embattled hierarchy. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, what has the Vatican said about this meeting?
Well, we haven't heard any official statement. We reached out to Alessandro Di Sotti, the papal spokesman. He said he's not giving any official statements yet. We know that the Pope met with Barbarin in his private library in the Apostolic Palace this morning. And usually when the Pope accepts a resignation of a bishop, it comes out in the noon bulletin here in Rome. We didn't see any reference to the resignation of Cardinal Barbarin in today's bulletin.
The Cardinal has been convicted of covering up abuses. How has Pope Francis handled other cases of cardinals accused of cover-up?
Well, in the cases of bishops down in Chile, we had the entire Bishops' Conference of Chile submit their resignations, and he went through one by one. He's investigating each case and seeing who did what, and based on the verdicts of the canon law trials here in the Vatican, he's making decisions on those cases. In other cases, you go back and it's a very similar sort of an operation, going through, finding the truth, and then making decisions.
Do you think it would be hard for Pope Francis to accept this resignation?
Well, Lauren, he didn't accept the attempted resignation of Cardinal Barbarin back in 2016. It appears that in this case he's waiting possibly for the appeals process to run through to make a final decision. He's in a tight spot if you consider that if he accepts the resignation now before that appeals process goes through to its final end, he could be seen to be bending to media pressure, could be seen as an official recognition and acknowledgement of the Cardinal's guilt, even though the process isn't over yet. But if he doesn't accept the resignation, it could also be seen as not doing enough, an inappropriate response to a civil verdict that has been passed down and a conviction.
What are you hearing among your Vatican sources about whether or not justice was done in this civil case?
Well, if you look back at the details, the public prosecutor actually dismissed this very same case against Cardinal Barbarin in 2016. He cited insufficient evidence and also a passing of the statute of limitations. There are questions about the media pressure that was put on the case, much like Cardinal Pell's case in Australia, in that there was a film that was released simultaneous with the trial that spoke about clergy sex abuse that was inspired by Father Prenat, the priest in question that Cardinal Barbarin is said to have covered for. And so in this case, the Cardinal's defense attorney actually said that in this sort of media circus, it was possibly just a show trial. And he says it casts serious doubts on whether or not justice was actually served.
Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Lauren.
is bigger than that which divides.
And that's Pope Francis speaking with President Salva Kiir of South Sudan. And the Pope is considering visiting there. He says he wants to encourage peace in the war-torn country. Almost 400,000 people have been killed in the years-long conflict. Coming up, a health scare for the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And an update on the ongoing investigation into clergy sex abuse in one U.S. state. Pittsburgh Synagogue, which lost 11 members of its congregation less than 5 months ago in an anti-Semitic attack, raises funds to help the Muslim community of Christchurch, New Zealand. A message from the congregation of the Tree of Life Synagogue on its GoFundMe page reads, quote, "We stand beside our Muslim brothers and sisters. We will continue to work toward a day when all people on this planet can live together in peace and mutual respect." Joining me now by Skype from Pittsburgh is Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of the Tree of Life Synagogue. Rabbi Myers, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you.
What was your initial reaction when you heard about the innocent people killed in their place of worship?
To me, I felt as though the scab of my wounds had just been ripped right off of me. And it was, frankly, a very, very difficult day. Not just emotionally, but I can't tell you how many media outlets bombarded within the course of just an hour to want to get a comment from me in some way, shape, or form.
Well, okay, we're a few days late. Just to clarify, we don't have a broadcast on Saturday or Sunday, or we probably would have called you. What are you hearing from your members? I'm sure their reaction is the same as yours, or maybe it's not.
Well, we spoke about it a bit, kind of like an open conversation. I just dispatched with my sermon Saturday morning because I knew that wasn't the subject. And we just had an open conversation about how do we respond as a congregation, both locally to the Islamic community, as well as internationally to the Christchurch mosques that had this horror. And it was more of just a possible cathartic experience to talk about, what do we do? How do we cope? Because for many, including me, it was though October 27th had just started all over again.
In both instances, yours and the most recent attack, people were murdered while practicing their religion. Did these attacks show an increase in hatred that translates into mass violence?
For some, it does. That there are people who don't have the capacity to want to learn more about their neighbors, to find ways to live life together, to realize we have so much more in common. And sadly, there are people on this planet who don't have that capacity.
When this attack happened, I know that solidarity from the interfaith community was of great importance to you. And I know that the Catholic community there also really reached out and tried to show its support. How do you think that kind of outpouring could help the folks in New Zealand?
I don't want the actions of one person or possibly more to shadow the beautiful people that exist on this planet. To give a simple number, 1% of our planet might be people who have nefarious goals, shall we say. That shouldn't cover the other 99% of the people on this planet who are wonderful, good, decent people. And they demonstrated that to me, continue to demonstrate it day after day with a continued outpouring, cards, letters, gifts. And it's just remarkable. And I know that our planet will respond to Christchurch, to both mosques, in the same loving, caring way.
Well, I'll give you another number that really impressed me, that Muslim organizations raised nearly $200,000 to help the victims and their families after the shooting in Pittsburgh. And I know that your support must mean a great deal to all of those in New Zealand. Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, Tree of Life Synagogue, thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference is in the hospital after suffering a mild stroke Friday. Officials say Cardinal Daniel DiNardo is resting comfortably. The 69-year-old is expected to remain hospitalized for several more days. Michigan's governor has asked lawmakers for an additional $2 million for the state's ongoing investigation into clergy sex abuse. The probe is expected to last at least another year. It was spurred by a 2018 grand jury report from Pennsylvania that found widespread abuse there over 70 years. Up next, new polling on President Trump and his approval rating among evangelicals and other religious groups. And March Madness, the Catholic schools vying for the top spot in the NCAA. More than 2 years into his presidency, white evangelical Protestants in the U.S. continue to overwhelmingly support President Trump. A new analysis of Pew Research survey data from January of this year finds roughly 69% of white evangelical Protestants approve of the way the president is handling his job. 44% of white Catholics give the president a high job approval rating. Joining me now is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill. Bob, welcome back.
Hey, Lauren.
Taking a look at these numbers, white evangelical support is up. Religious support in general is critical for the White House and for his re-election. Do these numbers surprise you? How significant are they?
You know, in some ways they do surprise me in that the president has been a controversial figure, without a doubt. But if you think about why the evangelicals are sticking with President Trump, I think a lot of it has to do with his judicial nominations. And remember, you had 2 terms of Barack Obama and him filling up a couple slots on the Supreme Court, and now it's been Trump's turn. And that's why it's the biggest thing for Mitch McConnell is not really moving legislation. It's moving Donald Trump's nominee. So that's why I think that strength is there. And you're right, he needs that base for his reelection.
He sent 50 tweets over the weekend. we tallied them. They were targeting different people, from media to Google to the late Senator John McCain. What do you make of that?
Well, he certainly, when he has free time, he tweets more. And certainly he has not been able to get over John McCain and how John McCain killed his health care bill. John McCain also had a role in the dossier and giving it over to the FBI. I do think that, listen, Donald Trump likes to say what's on his mind, and he's going to continue to do it no matter what chief of staff he has.
What impact is this going to have on Republican support for the president? We were just talking about how the evangelicals and religious support him. When he does that, what happens to his base?
Well, I think the base loves him, and I think that, as he said, he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue.
He said that.
Yeah, he has actually said it, and he wouldn't lose support. Now, there's been talk of a primary challenger. Certain figures in the Republican Party, like Bill Kristol, are seeking a primary challenger. I think that's going to be very difficult. Number one, to get anyone prominent in the race, and because Trump is so strong with his base, I think Trump would easily win. However, for the general election, Trump has got to worry about some of these tweets.
Let's move over to the Democrats. Beto O'Rourke, a former congressman, raised $6 million in 24 hours. He lost to Ted Cruz by 3 points, and he raised $80 million for that entire campaign. So my question to you is he just a media darling of the moment, or does his candidacy have legs?
When you can raise that kind of money, I think you've got legs, because you're going to have the staff. Now, I don't think his launch has been that great. He's had a couple stumbles. He said he was born to do this, and then he kind of regretted that. And so he's been playing a little defense, but at the same time, he shattered fundraising records. He raised $38 million in 1 quarter, $6 million in 24 hours. You know, what can Joe Biden raise? That's a big question.
Is he even running? He's running, he's not, he's in, he's out?
I think, he's definitely in. He's got a team.
Okay.
It's just a matter of when he does it, and his launch has got to be good and also gaffe-free.
Gaff,
Yeah,
G-A-F-F-E,
yes.
right. Thank you so much, Bob Cusack.
Thanks,
Always
Lauren.
great to have you, editor-in-chief for The Hill. Finally tonight, the seedings for the NCAA men's basketball tournament unveiled last night. Catholic schools are well represented, 8 schools among the 68 invited. They are Gonzaga, Iona, Marquette, St. Louis, St. John's, St. Mary's, Seton Hall, and Villanova. And last year, Catholic schools swept the championships. You remember, Villanova won the men's title, and Notre Dame claimed the women's crown. This year's championship games are on April 7th for the women and April 8th for the men. There has already been a promise of a cupcake to anyone who wins the brackets here at EWTN. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.